We welcome now our political roundtable, Basil Smikle, Democratic strategist and former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, and Jen Kearns, Republican strategist and former spokeswoman for the California Republican Party. So, Jen, I want to start with you, actually, because we'll put up a map of where the president is spending this last day. And there are a couple of them I understand, Ohio I don't understand. So you've been on the inside of these things. I understand why he's going to go out to where Barbara Mikulski's running. I understand why he's going to Indiana, where the Senate's up. Is the Ohio Senate race really open?
Well, Ohio's awfully close to Michigan, where Debbie Stabenow's fate is at risk. But I think the reason you see the president there, he's looking forward to 2020. This is a strategic decision. He's going in there. This is less about the midterms and more about where we're headed the day after the elections, regardless of the results.
Well, before we get to 2020, Basil, which we will, I'm sure, but late tomorrow night. By late tomorrow night, we'll be there. But before we get to that, let's talk about tomorrow and voter turnout, because we're seeing a lot of numbers, certainly in the polling, saying, boy, I am really going to show up to vote. And even in the early voting, that might indicate we're going to have a pretty remarkable midterm.
Yeah, you know, as a Democrat, I have tried to stay away from the blue wave language. I think we'll have a good night. And that's true historically, that the party not in power will have a good night. But I also think Democrats and voters broadly want to send a message to D.C. that even if we don't like, even if we are okay with the president's outcomes, we don't like the process, we don't like the rhetoric, and we want some balance. So I think Democrats are hoping that it's, number one, love for our particular candidates, but it's also voters wanting to see some balance in Washington.
So, Jen, there's clearly enthusiasm on the Democrat side. There's also a lot of enthusiasm on the Republican side. Yeah. But let's talk specifically about the younger voters, because there's some numbers coming in some states that are pretty extraordinary about the number of the amount of increase. Look at that, Arizona, 217% more than last time. You can see across the board, 364% more than in Nevada. Is that good or bad for Republicans if the youngsters come out and vote?
I think it's good for Republicans. Look, the more people that are engaged in our system, we think that's a good thing. I think the overall numbers are pretty astonishing here. You had more voters voting in early voting by Saturday morning, 33 million, than had voted in the total early and absentee voting combined in the 24 midterms. This election, and I'm sure Basil would agree with me, has all of the fervor of a presidential election. And you've got both presidents here competing for crowds and rallies and comparing crowd size. This is phenomenal. And I think, given the fact that President Trump is still filling these stadiums, I think the race is not going to be a blowout, as the CBS News poll said. If you look back at the 2016 presidential elections, that CBS News poll actually got the election wrong. A couple weeks out, they said that Hillary Clinton was going to win. She was ahead 47 over Trump by 38%. We know that those numbers didn't turn out well either.
I still cry over that, but that's all right.
Well, but one of the things is, if we've learned nothing else, you can't trust any individual poll. You have to take sort of an average across, and that's why you go to places like 538 and real sort of clear politics that don't do one individual poll. Yeah. But for the Democrats, what do you need to succeed? What will make the difference in these last 24 hours as people decide, am I going to show up to vote or not?
A couple of things. One, there's a statistic that we haven't talked about in a very long time, which is that during the Obama administration, Democrats lost over 1,000 seats nationally. And what that means is that state houses are also at stake in this election, 6 to 8 that we may actually flip. And if we can talk to voters about the importance of state legislative races on the importance of their day-to-day lives, I think that matters, number one. And number two, I have always been cautious about consistently going after Donald Trump. He's a projection of angst and anxiety. If we focus on local issues, that's what happened with Conor Lamb in Pennsylvania and others, Ayanna Pressley in Boston. Talk about local issues, don't nationalize the races too much. I think that makes the difference.
So, Jen, one thing is very local is weather. And there actually is some bad weather coming across the upper Midwest, it appears. How could that affect? Does that cut one way or the other when it comes to Democrats versus Republicans?
It typically does. Historically, if it rains on Election Day, that's actually good for Republicans. Don't ask me why, but it suppresses turnout a little bit. But look, the only blizzard that matters at this point is those text messages hitting people's boxes. reminding them to get out and vote. And look, the propensity is on Republican side. We saw after the Kavanaugh hearings that the Republican propensity, likelihood to vote, was up anywhere from 8 points to 12 points. We also know Republican women were very concerned about those Kavanaugh hearings. So I think the slight edge and momentum goes to Republicans here. But again, those House seats are very tricky. Those districts that got redistricted, very tricky.
If I could just add really quick to that, that's an important point. Democratic enthusiasm is not exclusive of Republican enthusiasm, and we have to be mindful that there's going to be turnout on both sides. So we have to be ready for that.
It's not a zero-sum game, but I don't know if you're a betting man or not, Basil, but there's a new piece out of the Bloomberg that basically goes to 2 or 3 different betting things to see how the bets are coming in. And the bets seem to be going pretty heavily that the Republicans will not hold on to the majority, that 218 that they need. You can see very heavily weighted to 217 or lower for the Republicans.
No, I think we'll have a good night. I think we take back the House. My guess is maybe plus 3 or 4. I'm not so sure about the Senate, and that is a little concerning for going forward, but I'm confident about the House.
So if you had to choose, Jen, make a tough choice between losing the House by a few votes but gaining 2 or 3 in the Senate, or actually keeping the House and losing the Senate, which would you rather have as a Republican?
Boy, I think the Senate is more key, so I'd rather hold the Senate. I'd like to have both, though, to be honest.
Of course.
I think it's a little too close to call. But, hey, the big winner in this is the American people. Record turnout means people are engaged again. And, look, I think the closing argument, the only thing a Republican candidate across this country needs to say is to ask the question, are you better off than you were 2 years ago? And every sector of the American economy, Americans can answer yes.
Yeah, the question is whether they feel it or not, right, Basil?
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's my concern.
Whether they feel that way. Okay, many thanks to our political panel, Basil Smikle and Jen Kearns.